Julia Vitarello is founder and CEO of Mila's Miracle Foundation. As you know from the video, she worked alongside a team led by Dr. Tim Yu of Boston Children's Hospital to develop a first ever drug customized to just one person, her daughter Mila. Mila passed away in February 2021. Julia presents Mila's story at scientific meetings and conferences across the country. Driven by hope and a sense of obligation to help other families, Julia is dedicated to turning Mila's story into a new treatment path to personalized medicines for children with rare diseases. Thank you all of us for joining us today. Julia, my first question is for you. You have been such a pioneer in helping the medical community understand the impact of severe diseases on the family and considerations for N=1 therapies. Can you tell us a bit about the conversations around informed consent for first-time therapy and how you thought about the risk-benefit considerations? And what can we learn from your experience as we consider developing new therapies in utero?
Yeah, thank you, Tippy, so much for including me, by the way, in this conversation, because it's one that obviously means a lot to me. And it's just a really important conversation to be had right now. So thank you first for including me. I think many of you probably know Mila's story. And if you didn't see the video that was played right before this, without assuming that you all do, just in very, very brief, my daughter Mila was a very, very normal, typical, outgoing, coordinated, verbal child that was very healthy, that had no medical concerns. But around 3.5 years old, she started tripping and falling. She pulled items in really close, like toys and books. She was stuttering, and more kind of neurological symptoms came on over the course of 2 or 3 years. After about 100 different visits to doctors and therapists, I gave up because everyone told me that I was crazy, and that these symptoms would resolve by themselves. And they got worse and worse. I eventually brought her into the ER in Colorado Children's Hospital, which is near where I live. And she was diagnosed with a very rare variant of an already rare disease called Batten disease. And initially I was very happy that I was not crazy. And I felt like if there was a problem, I could somehow fix it. I knew nothing about genetics or about rare diseases. And after learning about Batten disease, about 5 minutes in, I realized that it was one of the worst diagnoses Mila could have been given. I started a foundation because I thought other parents had done that, and I'd started reading everything I could about rare disease and speaking with doctors and scientists. I started raising money and telling Mila's story, but Mila was missing a mutation and she needed 2, and no lab could find the other one. And so my story crossed paths with Dr. Timothy Yu, as Tippy mentioned, at Boston Children's Hospital. And what I could say in an entire 30 minutes, I'll say in just 1 second, which is that a lot of work and time, not only by Dr. Yu, but by many other people, I'm sure many of you that are watching were part of this as well, of a pretty Herculean effort, which turned into, within just 1 year, a personalized antisense oligonucleotide, or ASO, that was tailored just to Mila, in the sense that there was no other child in the world that shared her mutation. This drug was called Milacin and was given to my daughter 3 years ago. And it showed enormous hope and promise in the first year. It surprised us all in the sense that it not only kind of stopped her very rapid decline at that point. She had lost her vision. She had lost her last words. She could barely stand. But she was still smiling and laughing and fighting hard. But after the first year, in the second year, it was harder to understand whether or not it was stopping her disease. And in the third year, we noticed that her disease was taking over, and that she received Milacin just too late for her. She was 7, and that was very late for Batten, CLN7, which is her variant. After a 3-year fight, I like to say that Mila's spirit left her body, because that's what feels most comfortable for me. And it's been an incredibly difficult year for me, because that happened just only 7 or 8 months ago. And the reason why I'm here today and why I continue to be a voice in the world of rare disease, and this is very exciting to be part of something that's even more cutting edge in terms of prenatal genetic therapies, is that of course, I wonder, what if Mila were received Millicin 3 months before? She didn't have any seizures 3 months prior to Millicin. What if she received Millicin 3 years before, where she was a outgoing little child that was had no symptoms really? She was skiing, she was rock climbing, she was singing the ABCs and swimming. You know, what if she had received that 3 years before? So this topic today really hits home for me, and I want to bring it around to Tippy's original question, just so you had some context to this. Is going into Millicin, no other child had ever received this drug. No human had ever received this. So Dr. Yu was very, very good at setting expectations correctly. Mila's cells were returning to, restoring health with Millicin in a lab, but that was the lab. And I knew where Mila was headed if she didn't receive Millicin. And I knew that she would lose every ability, possibly besides hearing. But other than that, she would lose every ability and she would die in the next few years. And I also knew that there were decades of work, because Dr. Yu explained all this, and I learned this over time talking to many people in the antisense oligonucleotide world, that there had been decades of work in animals, and this wasn't voodoo science. This was something very legit that was very promising, and had shown great promise with Spinraza for spinal muscular atrophy. And I knew what I was up against. And really the way I started thinking about this was, what is the risk? You know, the risk benefit analysis to me didn't make sense. Those words didn't mean anything to me. What meant something to me was, what is the risk of treating Mila versus the risk of not treating Mila? And that's the way I have and continue to speak about the paradigm, which is a really important one, because it is, the risk benefit analysis, however we talk about it, is the base of the house. It's the cement that you're pouring in the base that we build this house on. And how we approach this is really important. I think that I knew that it was a long shot in the sense that Mila was losing all of her abilities, and it was 7 years old, and she was the first person ever to receive a personalized ASO. But I knew that if we didn't give it a try, that she would lose all of her abilities. And something that people don't always really understand is, with a child with a fatal disease, it is not just death that is initially, when you hear that your child has a fatal disease, it's the death. But I will say that watching your child lose abilities is something that is beyond sadness. It's beyond pain. It is something that I have no doubt has cut many years off of my own life and all the lives of the people around me. It is hard to get through every day when you watch a child lose abilities. And so, all of this has to be considered when you're looking at the risk of treating Mila versus the risk of not treating Mila. And so it helped. It greatly helped a lot in the first year. And not only did it help in the first year, even though it wasn't in time for Mila, it greatly improved her quality of life. And so my decision, I didn't spend more than 1 second considering whether or not to do Millicin. It seemed obvious to me that this was a lot better than not trying at all. And, I think often of do no harm. I am not a scientist and I'm not a doctor, but I think of that and I understand why it exists. But I would say that do no harm can backfire if it's interpreted in an overly careful way, because, and this is really important for me to say this, is that obviously we need to do things that are safe. We need to be very careful that a drug that's being delivered to the brain of a child that has a neurological condition is safe enough that it's not we don't think is going to kill them on the spot or make their lives worse, of course. But we do need to be safe. That's a given, but we have to be very aggressive. If not, we will never make steps forward. And I hope that we can be both safe and aggressive at the same time. And, inactivity is much more harmful in my mind than very, in a calculated way, being both safe and aggressive. And so I hope that helps explain kind of the dynamic from a parent's point of view, having lived this, and sets the stage for these further conversations. And I think that it's very important that future families that go through this, especially those that we're talking about treatments in utero, are really explained that this is still new and we're learning a lot. And that there's a lot of hope and possible benefit, but we're also learning, and there's going to be a lot of losses along the way as well. And that's okay. because we need to learn and we need to do something. Otherwise, there are millions of children like Mila dying. So I hope that that sets the stage and answered your question, Tippy.
Yes, thank you so much, Julia. I really appreciate that. Julia, I want to give you kind of the last word in this panel. You know, you've listened to a lot of these talks. You've been kind enough to talk to us. What is some advice that you would give for our antenatal gene therapy community moving forward?
Thank you, Tippy, for letting me kind of give a last word here. You know, for me, I've been part of this rare disease world for the last 5 years, since Mila was diagnosed. And mostly because Mila's story kind of made it into the spotlight quite a bit. I've gotten the chance to get to know many, many different families and children across so many different diseases. And rare genetic disease in children, to me, feels like a global health crisis. And I'm always shocked that people in this industry don't use terms like this that may seem, I was kind of afraid to use these terms because they seemed exaggerated, you know, and I'm a crazy parent that wants to fix the system, you know, but in reality it is. And, you know, when you look at an estimated, no one really knows the number, but 60 million, you know, children with just fatal and life-threatening rare genetic diseases around the world, that's pretty serious. And, you know, the numbers are up there with cancer, with HIV/AIDS, with COVID. So to me, this is a major crisis and involves children losing abilities, dying, having terrible lives while they're alive. And, you know, I look at this and then I also see on the science side that we have a toolbox, which was like seemed almost empty when Mila was, you know, diagnosed. There was gene therapy and there was a lot of stuff in the pipeline and in the works. But now we have a toolbox, which is becoming more robust and the science is getting there. And then I see these 60 million children, and then I see a toolbox that's kind of filling up and we're learning a lot. And I think, what if Mila, like tiny little Mila in utero, received Millicin? These are genetic diseases. We don't know when they start. You guys know a lot better than I do, whether, you know, at what point the genetic disease starts taking a toll on that child. But the reality is the dominoes probably start to fall possibly before birth. And so imagine Mila receiving Millicin in utero. She might never know what Batten disease is. We as a family and our community and our direct and indirect family and our friends may never know what Batten disease looks like, losing all of your abilities and dying. And how do you live with now a broken family, in my case, and a sibling that never receives any attention because I'm taking care of Mila all of the time up until recently. And all the pain on the other side of having to learn how to live in this world without my daughter. It is going to be risky. We have to learn things. This is new, but we have to start somewhere and we have to take those risks and kind of accept that there are going to be losses along the way. And there might be many, but we have to do that because it's scary to imagine injecting Millicin into a tiny Mila in utero, but it is a lot scarier to imagine not trying and having tens of millions of children and their families go through the loss in months and years of losing every ability and being in pain and in and out of hospitals and dying. That's a lot scarier to me. So I just think we need to kind of always go back to looking at the risk of treating a child that has a fatal or life-threatening disease where there are no other treatments versus not even giving it a shot. Like, I think once again, we need to be safe and we need to be aggressive. Thank you so much for including me in this discussion. This actually is extremely exciting. I see hope, I see promise, and I hope that we can work, especially with the agency, which was really amazing with Millicin and really thought outside the box in a very, very new paradigm, was able to react very well and allow for Millicin to happen, which is allowing for, you know, all of us being able to imagine developing, you know, a drug for an individual, whether it be, you know, 7-year-old or in utero. So hopefully we can continue moving to be able to see more progress. So thank you for including me.
Thank you so much, Julia. And to all our panelists, I think that wraps up the day.